Okay, so I know I haven't exactly created the most positive videos about the Wimpy Kid franchise, so in today's video, I'm going to be doing something completely different. Instead of talking about all the not so great things about the series, I'm going to be discussing some of the best pieces of Wimpy Kid media, including our favorite books, favorite movies, and other related things like the Rowley books and merchandise. After all, it's a franchise that I and so many others enjoy, and were big parts of our childhood, so without further ado, let's get into the best Dire of Wimpy Kid media. Alright, before we start, I just want to mention that my bias is going to show through the video, but I'll try to keep things as fair and unbiased as possible. So, first, I'll bring up my personal favorites, explain why they're my favorites, and then bring up some other entries and why people love them to add to the discussion. The first thing we'll be talking about is the most obvious choice, but also the most divisive topic, as we'll be pondering about what the best Wimpy Kid book is. Now, if you ask me, The Ugly Truth is my favorite book out of the series, and I really wish parts of this book found their way into future entries. It touched on issues about growing up and what it means to be responsible, but it wasn't too preachy, and the book also still made way for humor and other day-to-day shenanigans in between. The Last Straw also had a similar feeling, although it felt less mature and more comedy-focused than The Ugly Truth. Not that that's a bad thing, it's just The Ugly Truth talks about maturity fit in well with the overall feel and tone of the series, something I don't think any other book did. Hard Luck and Double Down try to have the same expose about responsibility, but the plots in those books didn't really help due to how convoluted they were, and they didn't understand the balance between humor and self-reflection that The Ugly Truth has to give readers some, but not too much thought and laughter. The flow in both these books is really good too. Each journal entry is the perfect length, and no story stays too long or is just built up for a cheap joke. I think this era was where Kenny really understood how Wimpy Kid was supposed to be, and got real comfortable about what the books were going to be about, and also how to go about unfolding the narrative without one piece of the story having too much presence. A fairly stark contrast from the newer books where Greg will write pages upon pages about a day. Another book that a lot of other fans seem to like is The Long Haul, and I will agree, it's certainly up there. I think the main reason is that there's a lot that happens in the book, never a dull moment, but it also knew how to pace itself and without becoming overwhelming with the amount of stuff that was unfolding. I think my number one issue with this book is some of the stuff in it is rather outrageous, like the introduction of the pig and the seagull scene being prime examples, but otherwise, it was pretty fun to read, and the road trip plot gave the story good reason for the Heffleys to be engaging in activities we normally wouldn't have seen in the more home-based books, where Greg talks about what's happening at school and other events in his hometown. It seems a decent amount of people like the humor in this book too, pointing to scenes where the Heffleys try to recreate the fun activities from Family Frolic, only for their plans to go haywire. Moving on, while I like The Ugly Truth and The Last Straw for their narratives, I think the online series had the best humor. Now, I know it's unfair to choose this entry because it's not even a book and it consists of over 1,000 pages, so of course it has the most amount of jokes to make me laugh, but in my opinion, the online series has the best execution of the jokes told throughout the series. Kenny didn't have to change his jokes to fit in with whatever narrative or theme the current book he was writing at the time. And he didn't have to shorten any jokes to fit within the 212 page limit every Wimpy Kid book has. He took as many pages as he needed to tell a drawn out, but still funny joke. The only bad thing about the day-to-day structure is that some days aren't really that interesting, considering a handful of entries are only a page or two and seem to be there just to move things along, and to adhere to Kenny's schedule of uploading once a day during that time. Anyways, the online book also had some edge to it, considering there's a decent amount of more mature jokes in there that were cut when Kenny decided to adapt his web series into an actual book series. If I had to choose an actual book with the best humor, I'd go with the original book that started it all. After all, Kenny wasn't sure if Dire Wimpy Kid was gonna blow up, so it only made sense he put some of the best material in the first book, considering there was a possibility it could have failed. Okay, so the books I just brought up are the older entries, so to be fair, I want to talk about the more recent entries and try to come to a conclusion on what the best one is. Personally, Diaper Overload has to be my favorite newer Wimpy Kid book. I totally understand why people aren't exactly the biggest fan of this book. It's more about Roderick than it is Greg, and it still has a decent amount of the wacky shenanigans the newer entries are known for, but I thoroughly enjoy the story and humor of this one a lot. The day-to-day progression between journal entries about Loaded Diaper's adventure was pretty smooth all things considered, and I liked learning about Metal Chihuahua. Or is it Metal Chihuahua? The band humor was fairly clever too. The dynamic between the band members had depth, and Billy helping his old bandmates near the end of the book proved to be decent character development. I've seen other people point to The Meltdown as their favorite, more recent entry, and I totally understand why, as it's also one of my favorites. While it still had the ridiculous and overtly wacky aspects of the newer books, the story was pretty good and felt like a nice break from the vacation journals that all sort of had the same narrative skeleton, and it was cool to see Greg's neighborhood come together to fight back against the kids on the street. The story was something new that wasn't overtly ridiculous, and for the most part, it fit in with the homey nature the book series was known for, as opposed to some of the more recent books that get a little too ridiculous without good reason. At least a huge snowball fight between two parties that hate each other is pretty cool and created for an engaging narrative. One more book I want to bring up. I feel like this book is sometimes brought up as one of the older entries and sometimes as a newer entry, so I wasn't sure where to put it, so it'll go here. Old School gets a decent amount of praise. It is often cited as the last good book before things got crazy and Wimpy Kid lost some of its original charm. Old School certainly has the feel of one of the newer books, but its narrative feels more akin to the older books in that Greg goes into detail about daily technology and some of the escapades of too much screen time, which would be in line with the new Wimpy Kid, but the writing was still fairly relatable and not totally crazy like older Wimpy Kid. Alright, there's one more thing I want to talk about from the original series, and that is the best book cover. Personally, I like No Brainer's cover the best. I like all the little doodles around Greg's illustration, and it still looks like it could be an actual journal. Nothing feels out of place, but yet, it's also very colorful and expressive. If we're talking more simplistic covers, Old School would be my favorite because the subtitle logo looks real nice, the illustration is cool, and the black color of the cover reflects the whole quote-unquote blackout of technology the town goes through in this book. Some people like Diaper Overload's cover due to how sleek it looks with its black metallic shine. Okay, one more quick tangent before we move on. Apparently, McDonald's in the UK and Australia gave away bite-sized versions of some of the stories from the books as Happy Meal toys, and these Happy Meals also included a code for an ebook called The Best of Diary Wimpy Kid, which I couldn't find anywhere online. I do wonder what's in there. It would have been interesting to see what Kenny sees as his best work in terms of this series and compared to what I have here. Well, now that the main part of the franchise is out of the way, let's make our way to the movies. Now when it comes to movies, most fans would point to Roderick Rules as being the peak of the Wimpy Kid films, and I'd have to agree. After all, the character dynamic between Greg and Roderick in this movie was executed so well. Not only did it feel fairly in line with the source material, but it was also realistic, relatable, and served as a great narrative vehicle that kept viewers glued to the screen, wondering what was going to happen between the two brothers, especially when things went south when Susan and Frank learned about the party. I loved how the filmmakers incorporated character development in these movies. They knew they were most likely going to make movies past the first century, so to change some stuff up to enrich the overall story of the films and give people a reason to watch the movie rather than just reading the book. The humor in this movie was also the best out of the first 3 live-action films. The filmmakers understood how to translate the cartoonist nature of the jokes in the book into live action, along with adding in new jokes that worked with the story and were not out of place or inappropriate for the series. Apart from Roger Rules, I have seen at least a few fans say that Dog Days is their favorite movie, and I think the main reason for that is it showed more of Greg's development and it had a pretty satisfying ending, all things considered. The stakes were more than just Greg wanting to be closer to his brother. There was discussion and discourse about maturity and Greg doing something with his life, rather than just go to school, hang out with Rowley, and play video games. Now, while I haven't really seen anybody point out one of the animated films as their favorite film from this franchise, I still think it'd be nice to talk about them and pick the best one. Similar to how a lot of fans point to Roderick Rules as the best live-action film of the series, most fans will tell you their favorite animated film is Cabin Fever, and once again, it's for very good reason. The first 2 animated movies are kinda soulless. They don't look that great, their narratives aren't as strong as the book or movies they're based on, and the humor didn't work most of the time. Everything just felt half-assed. Cabin Fever fixed all these issues. First of all, it felt like a nice fresh breath of air to have an animated movie that didn't already have a live-action adaptation, and the movie was different enough from its book counterpart to justify its existence and give fans a reason to watch it over just reading the book. The other immediate thing was the visuals look good this time. Characters look kind of weird in the first two movies, but they look just fine here, and other parts of the cinematography looked appealing as well. The conflict and tension is decent too, the stakes make sense, and have some emotional depth. Greg knows he has to do the right thing, but he's not sure how to go about doing it. The humor wasn't amazing, but it was certainly better than the first two animated films in my opinion. The ending was pretty satisfying too. Everything got wrapped up in a nice neat bow, and it felt like Greg had learned something from the journey he went through. Okay, so as I was writing the script, I remembered that The Last Straw came out after I had already released the video where I reviewed the Wimpy Kid movies, so I decided to watch it to see if my opinion would change on what was the best animated film. I'm writing this just after finishing it, but I think it was probably my favorite out of the four films so far, and that's mostly due to its story. The pacing flows well, and everything is easy to grasp as events happen. The emotional connection makes sense, and it takes steps for both Greg and Frank to realize they're always going to be father and son, so they should make the best out of their bond. And the side characters like Mr. Warren and Rowley were intertwined quite well. They didn't take anything away from the conflict. If anything, they actually added meaningful depth with their foils and comparisons between characters. If there were two things I have to criticize this movie for is, number one, the conflicts at the start of the movie are very chaotic and a little wacky for the series in my opinion. I know that Wimpy Kid is fiction and the crazy stuff does happen throughout the series, but nothing that crazy has ever happened in the movies except for maybe the boat jump in the long haul. They're all fairly grounded, so scenes like the lawnmower going haywire and Greg messing up with the house key were a bit out of character. The second critique, I wish there was more between Greg and Weston. It seemed to be that Weston's problem with his dad was he was too involved in his dad's life. Perhaps he wanted more time to himself, but his dad insisted on bonding time because he knew it was only a matter of time before his son grew up and they wouldn't see each other as often. It's a foil against Greg and Frank at first, due to how different they are and how they don't want to spend time together. But as the movie goes on, they realize that they do love each other. And even though they are pretty different, they can absolutely spend meaningful time together. I felt like a real moment between Greg and Weston could have added to the overall message of the story because both could have came to a realization about their dads and why they matter. Why Greg should try to love his dad rather than push him away, while Weston should spend time with his dad but also realize he has his own life, that he should get to determine how it goes. Also, not really a critique, but the humor in Cabin Fever was better than The Last Straw. Otherwise, I think I can confidently say this movie was my favorite from the Disney ones as of right now. I know I mentioned this in the Wimpy Kid movies video, but I'm excited for the movies based on the later books. And funny enough, a few of the jokes from the later books found their way into The Last Straw. Just some neat stuff I noticed. If they keep the more developing narratives in future movies, they can continue being worthwhile films. Okay, I know I'm not really supposed to bring up this movie, but I will say I think The Long Haul had the best looking animated scenes out of all the movies. The kind of 3D look with shading and background depth looked real nice. I kind of wish it was transferred into the animated movies. It would have been a very appropriate fit considering they're a 2D series in 3D. Alright, that's all the main stuff out of the way, so let's talk about some of the more miscellaneous stuff, starting with the Awesome Friendly Kid books. For me, I like the second Rally book the best. I think it made the most sense out of the three entries of the miniseries in terms of its direction and execution. I think the original idea for these books was to create essentially Dire of Wimpy Kid, but from Rally's perspective, but I guess Kinney thought it was a little too close to the feel of the series it was based on, so he mixed things up with the second and third entry so that the stories would still feel in line with Wimpy Kid, but not be a rehash of the Wimpy Kid books. This idea worked pretty well for the second book in my opinion, considering the fantasy part of the book went hand in hand with Rowley's more juvenile and childlike nature, and the whole narrative was fairly engaging. I didn't mind the interventions with Greg and Rowley discussing how they could turn their epic into a marketable franchise. I think keeping the story too long in the fantasy world would have been a little too derivative of the books, considering how the Wimpy Kid books do try to keep things fairly realistic, even if some of the more recent books have some crazy shit in them. They were also a nice way for Greg to appear in the story, and yes, I know, this is Rowley's series, it's all about him, but considering how close the boys are, if you have Rowley, you've gotta have Greg. Getting back to my point, While I didn't mind the contents of the intermissions, I did mind how often they happened. They felt awkwardly placed and really interrupted the flow of the books. Anyways, another thing I liked about this book was how the story of the fantasy world was reflective of the real world, or at least the world the Wimpy Kid characters live in. It was another thing that kept the stories grounded and not too wild. All in all, I think the second book has the best humor, story, and direction. I really wish the style of this entry was continued throughout the rest of the miniseries, but Kinney decided to get more experimental in the third book. Speaking of which, while I have seen people claim the third book to be better than the second, I've never really seen anybody proclaim it as their favorite book from the miniseries, which is funny considering Kinney is coming back with another awesome Friendly Kid book that is seemingly going to follow the same formula as the third book. Anyways, if fans don't choose the second book as their favorite, they, from what I've seen, crown the first book as the best, and I totally understand why. As I mentioned before, Kinney started this miniseries as Diary of a Wimpy Kid, but with Rowley telling everyday stories instead of Greg, and some fans wanted it to stay that way, rather than the whimsical spin afterwards. As I mentioned before, I'm glad Kinney decided to differentiate these books from their source materials, but I wouldn't have minded it if the original intent of this miniseries found its way into every entry. In my opinion, the first book is okay. I really disliked how much Greg showed up in it. Like, I know Greg is a big part of Rowley's life, but there was so much of that boy in the book. At certain points, it felt more like Greg's journal rather than Rowley's. The anthological feel of the diary made the whole thing feel awkwardly disjointed. It gave the book a weird flow. Although, I guess it makes sense considering Rowley's personality, and I guess this was Kinney's way of making sure Awesome Friendly Kid felt different enough from its source material. In any case, it isn't a bad book, and I totally understand why fans proclaim it as their favorite entry in the miniseries, considering it's exactly what people would think about if Rowley were to write his own journal. Okay, so this next part will be pretty subjective and a bit out there, but we'll be talking about the best pieces of merchandise. Now, if I'm being honest, I have no idea how I'm going to maintain an unbiased and fair stance on what constitutes as the best ever merch, so I'm just going to bring up some of my favorite pieces of merch, and if I missed any that you think were really cool, let me know down in the comments. Anyways, I think my favorite piece of Wimpy Kid merch is this Greg bobblehead where he's holding a baseball bat in a Red Sox uniform. It's funny, Greg's 3D look is natural and looks true to the source material, it looks well made, it's rare, the base under Greg's feet being the first book is a nice touch. And it's a funny reference to the third book where one of Greg's teammates says they should name their soccer team Red Sox, despite the Red Sox being a baseball team. The poster book they released recently is full of a ton of really cool and well-made designs. To this day, I still debate whether or not I should buy it. They have official loaded diaper merchandise with the band's logo on various pieces of apparel, but personally, I like the I'm Sorry Woman merchandise more. It's just funnier and probably confuses people that don't know where it's from. As I was writing the script, they released a Botson shirt like the ones in the third wheel, and I quite like it. Simple but funny references I think are the best merch ideas for this series. Lastly, and I'm not exactly sure if this counts, but I'm going to put it in anyway, are the behind the scenes books for the live action movies. They're actually full of really cool information about the movies, including looks at how movie magic is made. Even the Long Haul's behind the scenes book is pretty cool, a pretty stark contrast from the actual film. Seeing all the stuff that could've but didn't make it into the film was also pretty cool. I would kill to see what the hell they filmed with the Corny's mascot. He's just so creepy. Interestingly enough, the Long Haul behind the scenes book gave us the first look at Metallic Chihuahua, which became a big plot point in Diaper Overload, which makes me wonder what else Kinney is holding from us that'll eventually appear in a later Wimpy Kid book. Alright, we're gonna make 2 more stops before I wrap up this video, so let's move on to the best songs from the Wimpy Kid musical. Did you know Diary of a Wimpy Kid had a musical? Well, now you do, and it's okay. I mean, it's just the first book adapted into a musical, with some differences here and there. Although I will say, the humor is actually good. I was expecting half-hearted attempts at the jokes that have been told time and time again, from Igdoof to the online series to the book series, you get the idea. But in my opinion, the jokes fit in with the situation quite well, and the new jokes have decent setups and execution. I actually laughed at most of them. Back to the topic at hand, my favorite song from the production was Mom Bucks. It's such a cheesy rap song, but I couldn't help but love how silly and not serious it was. Animal Heart wasn't bad either, although the scene associated with the song does drag on a bit more than it should. The musical songs were recorded and produced in a professional studio for those that want to hear the Wimpy tunes without having to watch someone's recording of the live action drama. Now, while that is my favorite song from the musical, nothing will ever beat Exploded Diaper from Roderick Rules. I mean, it's full of rebellious energy, the lyrics are full of personality, and the whole thing just comes together. Another reason that movie is so good. Finally, let's talk about some of the best fan creations. I always like to include the Wimpy Kid community in these videos considering how creative and open they are to discussion. I think my favorite fan creation is Freshman Year, a silly what if about the book's characters moving on to high school and a ton of other silly shenanigans. It's not supposed to be taken seriously, but all things considered, it did have a decent story, the acting wasn't bad, the humor works quite well, it has impressive production value for a YouTube video, and there's even hand-drawn animations in the Wimpy Kid style, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Go check it out for a roller coaster of a fan production. It'd be criminal not to mention a few LLBs in this section. For those unaware, LLB stands for Look Like Book, and is a fan-created story that looks like the Wimpy Kid books, with fans often continuing certain stories from the books in these creations, or creating entirely new stories featuring the Wimpy Kid characters. I'm gonna be honest, while I read a fair share of LLBs, that was years ago, so I'm really only going to mention the more famous ones because finding some of the better LLBs isn't exactly easy. My favorite LLB is probably 25 years later. I know that's a fairly common answer due to how popular it is in the loaded diaper community, but truth be told, it's very popular for a reason. On top of being one of the first good LLBs, it tells a fairly compelling story about what happened after the juvenile Wimpy Kid cast did after Greg stopped writing journals. While it does have some of its edgier moments, they aren't without reason or comedic value. Each of the more serious parts have merit, and don't feel thrown in there just to give the story some edge. Dark Web and Breaking Point were two LLBs I remember reading when they were fairly new, and they're some of the more serious takes on the Wimpy Kid franchise for the fans that want a different spin on the fictional universe. As for the memes, well, personally, I like the really dumb memes where it's just a page rip, but it's replaced with some stupid ass text that has nothing to do with Wimpy Kid. I know it's not highbrow humor in any sense, but I don't care. My dumbass can laugh at those all day. Alright, well, that's all of my favorite pieces of the Wimpy Kid franchise. It actually felt nice to go through the series with positivity, rather than the more critical videos I make about this franchise. Rather than ripping it a new one, I remember it for all the qualities we came to know the books for, and why we enjoyed them. And of course, I know many of you have different opinions than mine about the best pieces of Darren Wimpy Kid, so comment down below your favorite book, movie, or whatever you felt that I left out or didn't discuss enough in this video. I'd love to see the discussion. That's all for now. Have a good day, and let's remember why we all came to love this franchise in the first place.